Hello everybody, welcome to Eavesdropping at the Movies. I'm José.
I'm Mike.
This is going to be our second podcast on Three Billboards outside Billings, Missouri.
Ebbing, Missouri.
Ebbing, Missouri.
You never get every word.
So part of the reason for doing this second podcast is we had some responses from listeners that we want to address. And actually, I think kind of Mike has a whole series
I've been
of
doing
observations and theories and research. So I think this time around I'm going to act more.
Well, I've just been doing some thinking. That's all.
Okay.
Because I think I was slightly unfair to it the first time because I think that some of the things that my initial reaction to the film was very heavily. By the way, spoilers.
Yes, well, it's the second podcast.
I know, second podcast, but obviously spoilers throughout. I think my reaction the first time was very heavily coloured, if you like, by the racial politics of the film. And how that overshadowed things that are actually quite good about it and things that are nuanced.
Yes.
And I don't think I was wrong about most of it. I think I was probably wrong about some. I think particularly, actually, I was critical of it being a story of redemption of the racist character, and I don't think that's quite true. I think there is nuance to it.
Okay, well, it's still pretty true, really.
But I just think I think my reaction was more things were flaws as opposed to decisions that deserved some actual consideration. So that's what I've been kind of thinking about, and also I was thinking heavily about the author Flannery O'Connor, whose book the character Red Welby is reading at the start, and things like that. You know what characters read. Okay. And what characters watch and what characters drink and films, all that stuff is always very important. And I didn't know Flannery O'Connor, so I looked her up. The kind of things that I was reading about her, the kind of themes that are associated with her, I found very informative watching it the second time.
Okay, good. So we're going to talk about some of these things. I just want to say that, I've just seen it a second time, and though the mechanisms of the film become clearer to me, my overall evaluation of it has not changed at all. I think it's a very flawed film with really some wonderful things in it, and that remains my view. So
yeah, I ultimately agree with that too.
Okay, so we're just kind of going to explore some of these mechanisms and really kind of, I suppose, engage with some of the questions that have been brought to us really by people who've listened to the podcast.
Mm-hmm. So do you want to start with everything that's kicking off on your Facebook?
Yes.
We're going then. It's right there.
Okay, I can't see it though. Okay, so not sure of your thoughts on issues of race, gender, and all, which seems to me this is what the film is about. So really, I mean, you had a very interesting observation about, how the film is completely about gender and this woman who's been ignored and.
Yeah, well, I think it struck me as very obvious right at the start that the first time you see Mildred she's in the car and she spots the billboards and it's wordless and she just realises she can use these. And at the time, her hair is down and she's wearing a coat or something, not what she ends up wearing for the entire film, which is this kind of boiler suit get-up and her hair's tied up and she just looks very stern and kind of workmanlike.
Yes.
That's what she basically. The moment that she heads into Red Welby's office to talk to him about getting these billboards, that's when she's in that costume, and from then on she's in that costume basically throughout. There's a flashback where you see her again with the hair down previously. So, and I kind of thought like this is something that I really like about her character, which is that she just doesn't give a fuck what people think of her, and this kind of she becomes so determined immediately. And because we were saying that it takes so little effort for her to lose the town's support.
Yeah.
The entire town is behind her because her daughter's been raped and murdered. But then she puts these billboards up, which are attacking the police department and particularly the chief of police, who he's like, I guess he's a good man. He's got cancer as well, which gives him a bit of extra sympathy. And immediately the entire town is against her. And I think it it's related to the fact that she's a woman and she's. It's very easy to dismiss her once she does one thing that you don't like.
Yeah.
Like if there's something about good men, I think actually the phrase "good man" shows up in the film quite a few times. You're a good man at heart.
Yes.
He's a good man, and I think the fat dentist might say about Willoughby, he's a good man.
Yes.
So but then the corollary of that is a good woman, and what does a good woman do? Well, she keeps her mouth shut, really, doesn't she? Well, she doesn't.
Yeah.
Mildred doesn't, and so the town turns against her very quickly, and she stands up to it, and it's really powerful. I think that the kind of just her portrayal as someone who refuses to give a fuck, and that goes hand in hand with the way that she looks, because she doesn't care about, well, people are going to think she doesn't want to be any longer seen as pandering to what people think a woman should look like. You know,
it's very interesting what you're saying though, but the film is very too forgiving in my view, of all of these so-called, in quotation marks, good men, because all of these good men, in quotation marks, are doing horrible things. They're beating up their wives. You know, they're throwing people out of windows. They're
well, and the good man at the top, Chief Willoughby, who is really the best man in the film, is excusing all of this in his department.
That's right. You know, so, and he's got this line, you know, if you remove the races, well, you know, you only have 3 people, and then those are homophobic, right? So basically he's saying, like, you know, kind of everybody's, So actually the whole thing about these women who are good and who are under siege, like the film does kind of, it's very interesting when the guy comes into the gift shop and all of a sudden kind of there's this violence, or, you know, the kind of when the husband comes in and before you know it, you know, he's got her hands on her throat and against the wall, and, you know, and then, you know, the son has the knife out of his throat. I mean, you know, it's a place that's just kind of, you know, 1 second away from the most extraordinary violence, really.
Yeah. Violence begets violence, or is it anger begets anger? Yeah. But I think you're right, but there is this kind of, the anger and the violence is being just kind of shot in all different directions, you know. So again, Mildred, like, Mildred is not a purely good character, right? Like, she's the character you support and you're with her throughout the film, basically, but she's not purely good. She's actually quite monstrous at the start when Chief Willoughby says to her, you know, we've got so little evidence, there's only so much we can do. And actually he sounds very competent and reasonable. Like, there is only so much they can do with this case. They've taken it pretty much as far as they can without a huge slice of luck falling in their laps. And she says, you know what I'd do is I'd pull blood from every man in town. Well, what if he didn't? What if he was only passing through? Well, then pull blood from every man in America. Well, what if he was not from America? Well, pull blood from every... She says, get every baby. It's just like every newborn boy, and put him on a register. And then when they do something wrong, you can pull blood and you know it's them, and then you execute them. Like, that is monstrous, right?
Well, but it's rendered understandable because, you know, here's this woman whose daughter has just been murdered in the most brutal way possible, you know, and in the most sexist way possible, and she has extraordinary guilt about it, for reasons that were shown, right? So I don't think,
but it doesn't just stop there. So it goes on from there. So she has the can thrown at her car, and she gets out and she says to the kids, "Do you see who threw that can?" And the guy goes, "No." So she kicks him in the balls.
Yes.
And then she says, "Do you know who threw that can?" The girl says, "No." So she kicks her in the crotch. So only one of those kids could have thrown the can. But she's happy to knee both of them. It's like what she says about to the priest. She says, if you're in the gang, you're culpable.
Yes.
And that's the way she acts towards those kids, and that's the way she acts towards the police when she criticises Chief Willoughby, and that's the way she acts towards all men when she's talking about pulling blood from every man in America.
Well, I was just going to ask you actually about that point, because, you know, the comments about if you belong to the gang, you're culpable, do extend in gender terms, i.e., and it's a really interesting argument. I think. And so in some ways you could say, although this film was made before the Me Too kind of movement kicked up and started happening, all these revelations about Weinstein and all these people,
I think that there seems to be kind of a critique of that in this, or it can be read as a critique of that. Insofar as there's a kind of, the explosion of anger is taking out innocent targets, or kind of aimed at people where there's no evidence. So when she burns down the police station, it actually wasn't. She does that in retaliation for her billboards being burned down, but of course it wasn't the police that burned them down. It was her ex-husband.
Yes, but
and going off at the end to kill the guy who they know wasn't responsible for her daughter's death.
Yes,
they just think, well, he must have done something wrong, so we'll decide on the way if we're going to kill him or not.
To me, that's almost like a kind of a logical response to the absence of justice. That if justice is not seen to be done, then kind of rage manifests itself in the most irrational ways. Kind of, people do what they can on the borders, on the margins, irrationally, unjustly themselves, right? But there's like this enormous frustration that doesn't find an outlet when, justice is seen to actively not be done or not be cared for, actually.
Yeah.
Which is so that's kind of somehow in this film as well.
Yeah. And there's another one going back to the misogyny, because I think we're all over the place here, but going back to, I think you started off talking about the idea of the gender politics and misogyny in the film, the representation of misogyny. There is this thing about how her ex-husband beat her up, but no one takes her word for that. Everyone everyone portrays it. Even her own daughter says, "Well, according to you, he did."
Yes.
Which you think you really should listen to someone when they make those allegations, but absolutely no one does. No one listens to her at all.
And that's not just a comment, right? That's something that's
it's
repeated
kind of pervasive. Yeah. I think that. Well, I mean, that's something that we missed for sure the first time, I think.
Yes.
But it's definitely there, and I think it's actually quite good.
Yes. Okay. Good. So let's see. What else do we have? Another comment was that they found the movie disingenuous and snobbish. So, high concept filmmaking dressed up with piety and fable.
Disingenuous. I don't think it's disingenuous. I think it's clumsy. Snobbish. I don't think it's snobbish. I think the film is kind of trying to. I think actually watching it the second time made me, because the first time I watched it, I thought, This is two films sellotaped together. Yeah. This is a film about race, which isn't very good, and this is a film about grief and anger, which is very good, and they join together very badly. And the second time I watch it, I kind of respected it as more of a tapestry. I think actually things interplay a little bit more, and themes are shared across. There's kind of cross-pollination thematically.
I think it's, I found it a kind of imperialist filmmaking, really. I mean, here you have this Brit, going into American culture and really kind of, commenting on every aspect of it as if he knew anything about it, really, or as if he had the right to speak. And I kind of kept thinking, can you imagine, like, an American, I don't know, going into Bradford, and kind of making a film there about the racism and, the race relations and class relations in Bradford. And, I think there would be a storm here about it, right? And it would probably start with getting the accents wrong or something. And I was, so I just thought, this is the opposite of it. And actually, so many things are wrong, really. Like, I hated that, that Abby Cornish is there with her, Australian accent and so on and so forth. So in that sense, I suppose... Yeah, there's you could...
You'd say it's more arrogant than snobbish.
Yes, I suppose.
Yeah.
Though,
to come in and just assume you can get it right.
So, and to assume that those things matters. For example, some people, we're talking about the landscape, that actually this is not the landscape of Ebbing, Missouri, but that you see the Ozark Mountains, which are more typical of whatever, right? And
if I'm not wrong, I think Ebbing is a fictional town.
Oh, right,
but they might be talking about Missouri generally.
Okay, so, there's these mountains are not in Missouri, they're in wherever. I read something on that. And I was just thinking, well, can you imagine the opposite? Could you imagine, like, if something was meant to be said in Manchester, but you said it in Bath? Like, the outrage that would provoke here, right? Like, and it's somehow that those things are absolutely important here because, you're so important, but actually they don't matter there because nobody will know the difference, right? I found it arrogant.
It looks like it's a North Carolina town called Silver.
Okay, there you go. So it's North Carolina instead of Missouri or something. So those things bothered me. Anyway, we also have a friend of mine disagreeing completely about the tone deafness and superficiality of the politics. On your third viewing now, what do you think? Is the film still as stone deaf as you first thought it, and are its politics better thought through than we first imagined?
I consider it. I think it's that thing of, as we said before, the second time you see a film, you know what's going to happen. You know where the shifts are going to come. You're more you're more prepared. So, all that stuff is less jarring.
Yes,
I think it still is a little bit, but because I was acclimatized to it, I found it easier to appreciate the things I liked.
Yes. I found the use of language still very provocative and really kind of out of place in a film set in Missouri. I mean, I can't imagine, and I've never heard a son call his mother a cunt in an American film, ever. And kind of when you hear it here, which actually you do hear it in British films, and it is a much more common swear word here, but it still jars to me. Actually,
you still don't hear your son call his mum a cunt very often in British film, even. I just kind of. I kind of agree. I was prepared to argue with you about this because I think it's not that Americans don't never use the word cunt, but it is more charged over there. And I think the first use of it, I think there are about 3 uses of it in the film, and I think the first use of it is when the daughter in the flashback, it shouts at the mum, "Why are you being such a cunt?" And that struck me as quite, that's a highly charged scene, and I believed in that. But then it's used a couple of times after that in ways that are too frivolous. But then that's nothing compared to the use of the word nigger, which is just thrown about. Yes. There's no, I think the film at least slightly understands the violence with which the word cunt is used, but nigger is just used left, right and centre.
Yes.
And actually as jokes.
It's interesting. Would you compare that to Tarantino's use of it?
You can compare it, but I think the Tarantino comes off better. I think Tarantino's got this long history, I think, of people saying, well, he wants to be black, doesn't he? He uses the N-word all the time. Whereas I think if you look at Tarantino's later stuff, thinking particularly of The Hateful Eight and Django, the westerns, where it's a word which is being used to try and not hide the harshness of what the place was like, what the era was like. I think in Django it's used kind of pointedly at people, whereas in The Hateful Eight it's used more, as I recall, it's more sort of as like the landscape almost.
Well, the reason why I asked is because it's my impression. Well, first of all, the use of the word in Tarantino's films caused like a complete brouhaha, right? There was so much written about it, and people were scandalized and so on, very judgmental of its use. And yet, it seems to me that Tarantino always uses deliberately, that he's conscious of the effect that the use of the word is going to have, and chooses to use it, right? Knowing that it's going to have particular effects. So it's always a conscious use, I think, with Tarantino. Whereas with this, I think this guy has no idea, right?
No, I think that's right.
And so it becomes a problem in that sense that a writer should have a notion of how his words are going to, what effect his words are going to have.
And it strikes me that I might be out of my depth here, but it strikes me that the word doesn't have quite the same cultural charge over here that it does in the United States. I think obviously it does have a charge here, and it's used aggressively towards black people and has been for a long time. But I don't think the history of slavery in America informs it in a way that it doesn't here, because we never really had slaves in the UK. What we did was we went to other countries and then and then took over there. So we didn't people never really brought back here as slaves. Whereas obviously that's the way it worked in America.
Can I ask you to comment on something?
Oh, okay.
So this is.
I'm glad that you cut me off there, because I was going nowhere with
that. This is Andy saying, sometimes an outsider's view is discomforting, not because it is too shallow, but because it can see all the depth right there right there on the surface. I see it as a mirror image of Get Out. I love the tonal misjudgments. What do you think?
So he's saying the spectator sees more of the game. What do you think?
Yeah, I think there's some truth to that. I can see that up to a point.
Do you think it's true in the case of this film, or do you think as a general point more?
I think this point attacks the racism and sexism and homophobia and, how prevalent and how casual it is in a small American town than any film that I can remember, any other American film that I can remember does. So in that sense, it's I think Andy's right. So there is that element to it, right? Like it is it's all right there in the film. On the other hand, kind of that goes with like complete misjudgments in my view.
Yeah, so what, rough with the smooth?
Yeah. I mean, there is a benefit of having an outsider looking in, right? So kind of all of these general things and these structures, I think, are rendered very visible and understandable in a film like this. The nuances are completely bypassed. So, I don't know. Yeah, kind of. I mean, this film is about racism and casual racism, But actually, I also think that that's not the main theme. I think you were right. And, that kind of, to me, the main theme is about, these women who get brutalized, they get raped, beaten, burned, and they get kind of beaten up by their husbands and threatened by their husbands and, and then completely ignored by the society and blah, blah, blah. Yeah, so I think that's more the central theme of it to me.
It becomes clearer on a second viewing.
Yeah, it does.
Because I think it is overshadowed in the first one by those
those tonal misjudgments.
Those tonal misjudgments. It's what it is. It is because actually, the theme of racism really obscures everything else about the film.
Yes.
In a way that is so detrimental to it.
Yes.
You don't want to go into what Campbell said? Campbell?
Yes. So let's not forget him. So what was his point? Okay. I think Abby Cornish is miscast. There's a really painful lack of interiority for any of the very few black characters, which undermines the whole thing about racism. It makes it feel trivial when we don't see the effect of what a cop like Dixon does to black people. Yeah, that's obviously true.
Yeah, this is something that my brother picked me up on actually. Because there was a point in the first podcast where I said, why am I being asked to care about what this racist cop feels? And actually, it's a good point to pick me up on that, because the point isn't that I shouldn't be made to sympathise with this guy. I think actually that there can be a case to be made for trying to have some understanding of who he is. But the point is that you're invited to think about him and his feelings and his life, and his victims have no character at all. They are used as props.
Yes.
Every black person in the film is a prop.
Yes.
So the woman, the woman, the friend of Mildred, who he arrests, you see that she's got arrested from a note on the door, and then later she comes out of the car and she says, "I'm free." That's it,
Well, not only that, she's free. She meets the other black character who's helping to put up the billboards. Cut to them having a drink by an American flag in the bar, like as if just, kind of by virtue of, you mentioned.
There's a thing of there's a shot where it hangs on the shot, and she sees him, and they kind of connect eye to eye. Cut to, they're in a bar, like, you're black, I'm black, we're having a drink.
Yeah.
Which is rather like the kind of you're a white racist cop, I'm the black superintendent who's taking over, you're fired.
Yes.
Racism fixed. It's weird. It's
Mind you, there's a little bit more than that. He has just thrown a person out the window.
Oh yeah, no, yeah, of course. I'm not saying there's no reason to fire him, but that's the point. It's like it has to be a black cop who comes in to fix it, right? And even then, that guy, the new chief, at the end, when Dixon has been out doing vigilante detective work, he's been fired at this point. He's got no gun. He's lost his badge. He's not a cop anymore. He started a bar fight to see if this guy, he thinks this guy was the guy, so he wants his DNA. and it's like pure vigilante stuff. And it turns out he's not the guy. His DNA exonerates him, and the chief goes, "You did well." He didn't do well. He did vigilante justice. That's why you have a police department.
Yes, exactly. That's true of all of the film. What do you make of the ending in that regard? Now that you've seen it 3 times.
Well, I think this is where I was thinking about my initial response to it as a story about redemption, which is what a lot of people have been talking about, and why is this racist cop being redeemed? And I don't think it is that simple. I think I kind of overreacted, because I think... So ultimately what happens at the end of the film is Dixon and Mildred team up to go off to Idaho, 4 states over, and kill a guy who... 3 states over, to kill a guy who they know wasn't responsible for the murder. They think he's responsible for something. This guy definitely did something shitty. We don't know what.
Yes.
And they say, well, we'll decide. It's not clear, right? So they say, we'll decide on the way. I'm not sure if we're going to go kill him or not. But it's... And my brother was saying to me, well, the tone of the film suggests that they are definitely not going to kill him. They've already decided.
But don't
think it's that simple.
Yeah.
The film kind of leaves it hanging. That's
they're on the way there.
Yeah, exactly.
So.
They're diving there. So... and this goes back to what I was saying about Mildred being kind of monstrous at the start. Like... So this is what I was reading about with Flannery O'Connor. So the film flags up Flannery O'Connor as a touchstone for what it's kind of going for, or something, or a kind of reference point. And so I was reading about her, and she was a Catholic author from Georgia, in the sort of 40s, 50s, and she died when she was 39 years old. She wrote mostly short stories and 2 novels. And I mean, her work sounds absolutely fascinating. I really want to get into it, because her stories are kind of violent or grim, and 2 of the themes two of the kind of characteristics of her work that I picked up on from reading about her were the idea of the grotesque and the idea of grace. So grotesque characters are characters that inspire empathy and disgust at the same time. You know, whereas if a character just inspires disgust, they're a monster, really. But I think Mildred actually does both, right? Yeah. Like, so she inspires empathy. She's a hugely empathetic character. She's lost her daughter and she's grieving. She's not being helped by anybody, and you're with her the whole way. But she is also kind of monstrous in the respects I was talking about earlier. She's angry in ways that explode onto certainly innocent people, and she kind of takes no prisoners, I guess. And by the end, like, that's been kind of tempered, but she's still there's these kind of 2 parts inside, and I think Dixon is kind of the same thing. But I think the problem with the way it's, I think that's what's being aimed at with Dixon's character. But I think the problem with the way that it's executed is that then what inspires empathy in you and what inspires disgust in you are not shown side by side. You're disgusted by him at the start, and then that is transformed, or the film attempts to change that to empathy towards the end. And it's so I think the idea of it changing is what people are seeing, and what I saw as a redemption story. The idea that a character who was disgusting now becomes empathetic, and I think that isn't an issue with the film, because I think it's something that it's aiming for and missing. But it's still there. Like, it's a character who you want to see if his good side can overcome his bad side in a way. There isn't enough of a good side to justify what Chief Willoughby writes in his letter, where he says, "You're a good man at heart."
Yes.
Because he doesn't really back that up, and I think it's empty. It feels really empty when he says that. Because it's only after reading that letter that this starts to come out of Dixon.
Yes, though that it might...
Yeah, but I mean, if Willoughby saw it in him, then he's fucking psychic. Because no one else did.
No, it just means that Willoughby saw it in him, and we haven't yet.
Yeah, but we haven't... But the fact that we haven't is, like, the film is... It's up to the film to show us, and the fact that we haven't means that when Willoughby says it, it's incredibly hollow. You know? It sounds like a guy who's just saying something nice to be nice.
Yes.
And then I suppose this is the other thing that I was reading about with Flannery O'Connor that piqued my interest, which is the idea of grace, which is kind of mercy from God that you haven't necessarily done anything to earn, which is a really interesting concept. And I'm no Catholic, and this is... I mean, I'm familiar with the word grace, and I'm familiar with some ideas of mercy from God, but like this particular idea is not something I was familiar with. And I think it's interesting because when I was watching it the second time, I was kind of picking out all these places where, oh, that's an act of grace, and that's an act of grace, right? But the film is not religious or theological, really. It's quite a secular...
Though it sets
world.
it up as a question, right? Because when she's there, putting the flower pots for her daughter and it's talking to the deer... that is the question. I mean, what if there is no God and we live in a meaningless world?
True.
And, could there be... it's just senseless cruelty. So...
But, I mean, we were kind of picking out these places where people are just being kind to people. So, for instance, there is Mildred, who's been abused by her ex-husband, and he has then admitted to burning down these billboards. She just leaves it, and she just says to him, "Be nice to your 19-year-old girlfriend. Treat her kindly." And she gives him a bottle of wine and leaves it. And there's an act of forgiveness in there. And then right at the end, she opens up to Dixon and says, "I was the one who burned down the police station." She thought no one was in there. Dixon was, but she admits it, and he says, "Well, who the hell else was going to have done it? It was obviously you." He's already forgiven her for that. When he's in the hospital with the burns and he's wrapped up, he's in the room with Red Welby, who he's thrown out the window, and he says, "I'm sorry for throwing you out the window." And Red responds in anger, revulsion, but then he calms down and he gives him some orange juice, and he says, so he kind of makes a certain peace with him. And again, there's an act of grace. And the thing is about all these acts of grace is I think the film is basically building a world where it's like nothing is really clear, and people have the capacity to improve themselves just by being nice or being kind. But I think it comes across... I don't think it adds up to anything. And I think the issue with... maybe it's a misstep just in terms of... Like, these are acts of forgiveness and kindness. I think grace is something different. And grace... Because grace is this idea of God doing it, and because the film is secular, I think it's kind of lost on it. I guess there's the letters. There's the letters from Willoughby where he does kind things or says kind things to people, and kind of. So he says to Dixon, "You're a good man at heart, and you have what it takes to be a good detective." And
by virtue of him saying that, he becomes one.
Yeah.
On the one hand, you're saying, like, this doesn't add up too much. And on the other hand, by virtue of you listing all of the different instances in which it happens in the film, it does actually add up to
But I think this is just
like...
but
it becomes like almost like a little structuring element.
No, I think it is, but I think these are also... I think the idea of grace is just something that's missed. If the film is aiming for this kind of this theme of grace because of the Flannery O'Connor reference, I think that in particular is something that's missed. I think these are acts of forgiveness and kindness, but grace is something different. Grace is kind of numinous.
Yes, well, kind of. But surely you can, and people have tried to secularize that notion, because grace almost by definition is something from God. God graces you with.
Exactly.
So kind of maybe what the film is trying to do is find those elements of kindness and humanity, and things that enable you to connect with other people and make other people's lives easier, in a secular way. And actually, I think, acts of kindness to me and acts of forgiveness are the two elements that kind of recur throughout the film as a motif, and that kind of continue this idea, if you want to explore it, of a kind of grace that's inherent to people and not necessarily kind of a gift from God, that people can find the capacity to develop those elements that are in them.
Yeah, I think maybe I'm picking out a problem that actually isn't a problem, and actually it's something quite good about the film. I suppose I'm looking at it through this lens of what made me look for the idea of grace is this reference to Flannery O'Connor, and I think that actually if it's trying to kind of aim at Flannery O'Connor territory straight on, it seems to be missing because it's changing it. But then actually the fact that it's changing it is probably what it's like. That's what it's doing.
Yes.
And actually, I think that's no negative thing. That's actually quite a good thing because I think this is something that I like about it. This is something that I like. Actually, I do like all of these moments where people do nice things for each other. This is a film that's so full of hate and anger, and you know, and kind of vengeance and lust for all these kind of violent things. That when people are nice to each other, that's incredibly wholesome in the context of the film. And actually, it feels great. I mean, there's at one point, even these tiny little things, like Frances McDormand winking at Peter Dinklage. Yes. They go to dinner together because he's done something nice for her. He's basically given her an alibi for the arson of the police station. So she lets him take her to dinner. They see her ex-husband and his girlfriend there. He says, "Do you want to leave?" And she says, no, a deal's a deal. And she winks at him. And it's nice. And actually, she's such a fucking arsehole to that guy most of the film. I mean, and even through dinner, she still is, you know? That's a nice moment. I mean, the thing about the dwarf is... this actually goes back to the word cunt and the N-word, I think. There's this thing... I think the film was trying to draw a parallel with the dwarf because the word for a dwarf is dwarf, not midget. And midget is a derogatory term. And everyone in the film calls him a midget. To his face when he's there. He's a midget and he's the town midget. And he just takes it in stride because what can he do? But he refers to himself as a dwarf. You know, he says, "I know I'm a dwarf and I know I'm a used car salesman," and all the rest of it. So it's making a very clear point about the use of language. This is a film that's concerned with the use of language when you have that thing where... When Dixon says it's person of colour torturing business, you know, so the film is aware of it and it's trying to draw its parallel, which I think is what makes the use of the N-word that much more disappointing and just dislikable, because the film has this project of what language means.
Okay, let me shift gears because there are two things that kind of I observed in my second viewing, which bothered me, and I'd like you to tell me what you think. The first is the use of letters as a structuring device. So the Woody Harrelson character dies really halfway through the film, and then kind of his presence is felt, you know, throughout the rest of the film through these letters that he writes various characters. So he writes a letter to his wife, he writes a letter to the Frances McDormand character, and he writes a letter to the to the policeman, and they're like little homilies, really. And I thought it was a cheap device, and I thought partly it was a cheap device because whilst the letters are being read in the film feels like a vacuum. You know, you're looking at landscape or something. You know, so I thought it was kind of like a very poor use of film.
I mean, I disagree about that. I really like them. I think they're interesting. They're quite touching, I think. I mean, this is an example of the film of a great deal of kindness being meted out.
Yes.
You know, I thought they were well written and well delivered. I don't think they were a vacuum in terms of film. I think the act of someone sitting there and reading a letter that means something to them isn't necessarily uncinematic. You know, and I think they offer these kind of moments of pause and reflection and insight.
I thought they weren't cinematic.
You also suggested to me earlier that you thought they were theatrical.
Yes.
A theatrical
device.
Sort of frivolity.
Well,
but I think let the film have a little bit of theatricality. It's 2 hours long.
Well, yes, but there's a lot of moments about that are actually where the effect comes out, you know, from the concept rather than actually from a filmic telling. I'm thinking of the moment, you know, where the policeman is reading the letter, you know, and he's reading kind of the letter as all around him, you know, the police headquarters is going up in flames and he's unaware of it. I thought that was also like a very kind of, you know, theatrical way of rendering that scene.
There are elements. He should have, it's unrealistic. Yeah. He should have noticed.
Well, aside from it being unrealistic, you know, you can imagine how that thing would work on a stage much better than it would, you know, than it does on film.
Yeah, that's fair enough.
Now, and the last thing that I really wanted to comment on, really, is that visually the film is pretty.
You thought unremarkable.
Yes, that's a very kind way of putting it. Because you're full of grace.
It's not ugly, and there are moments. I think the visual of the billboards. I think the billboards are great to look at. They stand out, and they're these kind of, in the midst of this beautiful mountain, kind of bucolic scenery. These harsh, angular, bright red, flaming, vicious billboards stand out. I think they look fantastic, and kind of elements of design of, for instance, as we were saying earlier, the way that Mildred's character is designed, and the way her face is kind of shaped, stern and determined and angry all the time. Again, that's great as well. But I can see what you're getting at as well. I think the film is kind of reasonably elegantly directed, but not hugely expressively directed.
Okay. We've been going on for a really long time.
Well, what do you think? Don't just ask me.
Well, no, that's exactly... Well, I think I agree with you, except I would be harsher on it, right? So, kind of where you're saying it's not quite elegant or expressive, or it's elegant but, not very expressive. I actually thought there's not a single shot worth looking at, really, that kind of, everything is being told to you through the language and the performances, and because the language and the performances are often so great, it doesn't matter as much as it would in some films, right? Like, but that actually there's a whole visual dimension to the film that is not made much of, really.
I think there were at least a couple of shots. I mean, I said to you, the shot of Willoughby in the stable, silhouetted. Although, to be fair, I said this on the second viewing, but I sort of said, like, when you see that shot, you kind of go, oh, he's going to die here.
Yeah,
or the first shot where the first billboard is revealed, the one that says raped while dying, this camera pans up and it feels huge, terrifying. The film does have its moments visually, but they are few and far between.
It's a disappointment.
There's something... This is really nothing, really, but there was something about... When Mildred first goes to get the billboards, she says, "Oh, they're on this road that no one uses it since the freeway came in." I think. Do you think the film is trying to say there's something about the economics of the town being conveyed, but in people's jobs or the way they convene at the bar, but not very much.
No, and it kind of doesn't make sense. Really, to me. So you get the feeling that the town is going through economic hardship. That losing your job, is a major thing. That, finding out what kind of compensation is available per year's work is something that might enable you to live for X years more or whatever. So you do get a sense of, like, that people are squeezed financially. On the other hand, there's a lot made of the landscape and how beautiful it is, and the mountains and horses, and so kind of
it's kind of it's 6.5 dozen the other. And actually, I think it comes back to what you said about the film has no understanding of where it's set. Really, the line about no one goes down that road anymore since the freeway was put in. That line strikes me as such lip service to the idea of the credit crunch and economic hardship. That, like, it kind of suggests that the film is portraying this, and actually it's not.
Well, to me, there was a moment in the film where the racist policeman goes to talk to the new chief of police, and there were two flags. One, like in a pencil case. One was the American flag, and the other one, what I assume is the flag of Missouri. And they were both, like, really dusty and oily and old. And I thought, this is the kind of film in which that doesn't necessarily mean anything. That somebody, could just have said, how do we make a cop's desk realistic? And here are some flags and we'll plonk them there, right? Whereas with another kind of filmmaker, those flags and the way they looked and so on would have been a commentary on America. But in this one, actually, you weren't sure. It could be a commentary, or it could just be that somebody plonked it there.
Yeah. Yeah. What about the way that Dixon's mother lives? The old racist mother.
Well, I think, this
kind of racist hick squalor, basically.
Well, I think that, that's just meant to be like people's poverty, and the son is obviously taking care of her and supporting her, and, that's kind of partly the kindness that the Woody Harrelson character sees in him, because clearly his mother dominates him and probably psychologically abuses him. Like, she's one of those tough old broads that you think drinks too much and has a very nasty edge. So, but again, kind of in the hands of another filmmaker, you would have a thesis through what's being symbolized by this character. Kind of, in this one, it's just too diffuse, you don't know.
The film, weirdly, to me, feels kind of sub-Coen brothers.
Yes.
Which, and that's partially...
the casting.
Partially the casting, Frances McDormand particularly, and Woody Harrelson, and partially the setting in the American South. But I think, like, if the Coen brothers did it, the language wouldn't be... It wouldn't be as ill. It wouldn't be as ill-judged on one hand, but then it also wouldn't be as exciting.
Yeah.
Like the film does have these kind of verbal flourishes.
Yes, at
times.
There are times where it's absolutely glorious, and there are times where it's just off.
But it would kind of there's an incoherence to the film, which, I mean, maybe it's unfair just to compare it to the Coen brothers.
Okay.
But
So that might be a good note to end in, because there's an incoherence to the film, but you've now seen it 3 times.
Yeah. But I have seen it enough.
Okay, let's end it here.
Eavesdropping at the Movies is on Twitter and Facebook. Eavesdrop Movies, Eavesdropping at the Movies, Eavesdropping at the Movies at gmail.com, eavesdroppingatmovies.com.
Yes.
Ugh.
And we welcome your comments.
We do, even though we don't normally get any.
Well, we dealt with some
got
today.
a few today. Yeah. I'm done with Three Billboards, so I can tell you that. I've had my fill.